want to take you through what the latest data is saying about COVID-19, because we've just had the Prime Minister talking about the next step, about the fact that reopening is going to go ahead on the 19th of July, but the cases are going to get pretty high. And it's worth just looking at that in chart terms to get a sense of what we might be staring at in the next few weeks, because it could be quite dramatic. We'll start with this one. There's a reason there's all this space here, which we'll come back to in a second. But this is just showing you cases, which is the dark blue line there, and you can see that winter spike around there. There are kind of two waves in the winter really, but one in total. And then you've got admissions, so hospital admissions, those going into hospital with COVID-19 positive test. And what you can maybe just about make out is that those two lines, look how correlated they are through the winter, and now look at how they're diverging. So you've got cases going up very sharply, but admissions definitely going up, but not quite to such high levels as it was in the winter. However, it is certainly growing, and you get a sense of that really not from this chart, but by taking the same data and showing it in a logarithmic axis. Logarithmic axes really good for giving you a sense of growth rates, particularly at low levels, and particularly with admissions we've got low levels there, but certainly quite a steep growth rate. In fact, when you look, and the steeper these lines are, the faster the growth rate, really important for exponential growth. And what you can see is admissions are going up at more or less actually the same angle, certainly in the last week or so, as cases. So you're talking about cases doubling every 11 days, you're talking about hospitalizations doubling every 11 days as well, slightly less quickly. And these things, of course, are subject to change. That's just the average kind of growth rate each day in the last week or so. But nonetheless, that's quite a steep growth rate. So there is a divergence, that's reassuring, but there is certainly growth as well. And if we just extrapolate those numbers, so we've heard a fair bit about modelling. This isn't a model. All it is taking recent growth rates and extrapolating them forward. But by the way, that's been a relatively good yardstick for where we might head through much of COVID-19. If you take that for cases, you're talking about getting up over 100,000 cases by the middle of July or towards late July. And for hospitalizations, well, that dotted line there shows you you're getting up towards over 1,000 hospitalizations a day by late July as well, potentially about 2,000, depending on how fast that goes up. But of course, the big question is when that growth rate starts to turn. Actually, it looks like maybe case growth rate might be starting to decelerate, but it's a bit early to be too sure about that. But nonetheless, I think that the big picture is, and what I'll do is I'll just take the same data and put it back to a regular chart. So no longer logarithmic. This is the kind of chart that we're more familiar with. And well, that's pretty striking, isn't it? Look at case growth going up towards that 100,000 mark, higher than we've seen ever before in terms of certainly daily numbers. Some questions, of course, about what kind of tests we're looking at here, but still incredibly high case numbers. Whereas hospitalizations, still, a fair bit lower than we saw in that December-January peak. You're talking about more like what we saw around November. The question, though, is what happens next, and no one knows how high that would peak. And when you looked at some of the modelling that we've seen from SAGE and SPIM, there's such a big difference between some of the different models we're talking about. Some saying it's going to be relatively low, some saying it could be very high. So we're in a moment of great uncertainty right now. Another way of looking at this is to look at the lines and just show you the growth lines last time around. So that's last time around hospitalizations, really quite steep line. And then where we are now, that red line there, the latest, going up, but not going up half as steep as it was last time around. Still early days, but nonetheless, that looks relatively encouraging in comparison. And then ICU, so admissions into intensive care. That's what happened in winter, and this is just showing you once it got beyond a certain threshold, and each of these is the weeks beyond that point. And then that's the latest. So again, ICU admissions still low in comparison, but going up. But here's the thing, this is why it's going to be unnerving. We don't really know what's going to happen next, but what we suspect is when you start to reopen things like nightclubs, you see a spike. And why do we think that? Well, it's pretty obvious, all of us can imagine why, but have a look at what happened in the Netherlands recently. What we've got here is just case numbers by different countries, and you can see there's the UK. That's kind of, that's basically the Delta strain and the rise in cases in the UK. And you can probably expect that many other countries, when Delta arrives there, are likely to see relatively similar growth rates. And if we bring on Spain and Italy, well, that's kind of what you see. So there's Spain going up quite sharply recently. But just look at the Netherlands. I should say Netherlands, not Italy. Look at the Netherlands. That is going up incredibly sharply, up by maybe kind of 800% you're talking about there. And what's happening beneath the surface there is late June, the government in the Netherlands, I'll just highlight that, late June the government there reopened nightclubs. So 26th of June, it was going to be the 30th, but they did it on the 26th of June, reopened nightclubs, and then you saw that spike, and lots of anecdotal stories about clusters around nightclubs in the Netherlands, to the extent that just recently they've decided to temporarily close nightclubs, or at least close them earlier in the night. So the concern is you see a further kind of bit of impetus in case growth if you do start to reopen nightclubs, which is exactly what the UK is planning to do. So things are potentially going to get a little bit nerve-wracking in the next few weeks and the next few months, because you saw that chart a moment ago, case growth, just extrapolate it from where it is now, and you're talking about it getting up to very high levels, almost unprecedented levels. The good news is hospitalizations still really quite low, but it's going to be a nerve-wracking few months.